All right, Charles. You have to excuse my throat. It's a little early in the morning, so it's still waking up over here in New Zealand. That is so much fun. And I would say, in terms of brass band scoring, that is like grade 8. This is, I would say, incredibly hard in some respects. And I think there are a few things that are not practical. You might find the band director just going behind your back and rearranging a few things, or swapping a few parts out to other players and so on. Some things are a little too low, a little too high, a little bit too adventurous, even at a grade 8 level. You know, like, let's say you had like a fully professional brass band, you know, always winning all of the prizes and so on. I think they would still find this very, very difficult. And I think that you might also find that, you know, this Allegro Vivace at 144 might be slowed down to, say, like 126. You know what I mean? Especially with things like this sort of tie. You know, like that, it might be easier to go like the tonguing, you know, just playing this all as one, you know, like slurring per beam group, I think works a lot better. But I really do love this taka 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 taka. I think this stuff works really, really great. I'm just not sure. I mean, I think that if this were a piece that were played by by a particular brass band and they got to know it really, really well over the course of months or years, then I think you could possibly get up to the absolute precision and, and kind of breakneck speed that you have assigned here. Okay, so I knew taking this on that I would run into a little bit of extra work because there are going to be a ton of people out there who do not know the British brass band idiom. So I'm going to explain that really quickly. And pardon me, my constant throat clearing here at the beginning of this evaluation. Yeah, it's like 5 in the morning. Okay, so if you take a look at all of these cornets and horns and so on, these are pretty much all like cylindrical bore instruments, with the exception of the trombones, right? So there's a beautiful mellow sound, and there's a kind of an ease of playing. Like the cylindrical bore instruments kind of want to speak a little bit, cleaner and easier at first, which is why you see a lot of cornet bands and like a lot of a lot of trumpet players starting off on cornet in say high school groups or amateur groups and so on. Same thing with E flat horn. So the E flat horn isn't a it isn't like a concert horn with the big coil and the double like the double horn registers and the big flaring bell. It's more of like a band horn, right? So it looks very similar. It looks like a much smaller version of say euphonium or a baritone horn, right? These are also kind of based on the same thing. And then of course these basses here are big tubas, which are also based on the same thing, right? So it was an idea that came along in the 19th to the 18th to 19th centuries of this kind of new way of putting brass together, and that ended up with like the sax horn bands, which played in the American Civil War, for instance, and in other military bands and so on. So I'm using the term British brass band, and some people might get slightly, annoyed by that term and saying, well, here in Singapore we have the same thing, and that's, we're not British, or, but it's just I could say Commonwealth brass band, but it's something that kind of emerged, and it's most known for, for its origins in kind of the British amateur musical idiom. I think Brassed Off is a movie that's about a brass band that they come from like the poorest of the poor mining towns, and they win a huge competition and so on. And that is still something that is associated with poorer working class kinds of neighborhoods, cities, and so on and so forth. Sometimes associated with mining or with farming. We have a big brass band here called Wollaston, and I think Wollaston is, obviously, with a name like that is probably associated with that particular neighborhood in Christchurch, New Zealand, is associated with the wool trade, right? So probably a lot of farmers brought their wool there to be sold, I would imagine. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that association, if that is true, would not be would not be out of line at all. So let's talk about the constituents, all right? And I'll start from the most familiar to the least familiar, all right? So this is just your crash course on British brass band, and I just want to say before I go into this that I am experienced with brass band scoring on a professional level. That is, I have scored what they would call charts or arrangements for brass bands, for professional brass band players, and have had those arrangements played of my own original music in concerts where people paid. Now, that does not mean that I am a top level brass band arranger, even though I have, by this point, arranged about maybe 2 to 3 hours worth of music and about maybe an hour's worth over the past year. It just turned up that somebody wanted me to arrange my work Tane and the Kiwi for brass band, which I did, but I had to add flute and clarinet family instruments. Like one player playing E flat, B flat, and bass clarinet. Now, there's a really, really great book on this called Scoring and Arranging for Brass Band by Andrew Duncan. And that's a really good place to start. I'm not saying that is the end-all, be-all of British brass band arranging. Like the best possible guide for British brass band arranging is to actually get your hands on some scores. And especially some scores of music that was originally written for orchestral instruments and that has been adapted to brass band. And then you'll see immediately some of the philosophy of how these sections work. And I'm going to mention that now, okay? But everybody who knows this and is just getting bored, you can just jump ahead, all right? Okay, so most familiar to most people will be like the cornets, and the cornets are so important that they have got their own section, okay? And the section is of about 10 players, usually, okay? And you have got, first, it's sort of like the first, it's almost like the first violin section is the solo B-flat cornets. And you think, well, solo? How does that relate to like first violins? But it is in that this is the section of the band that gets the most of the main themes usually. Okay, but that doesn't mean that it can't be spread out amongst many, many, many other sections of instruments in the band. It's just that this is where the bulk of it lays, and it is going to be possibly the best players in the band, or at least with cornets, right? They're going to be absolutely essential to your sound. They're going to be the absolute rocks upon which you base a lot of your arranging. Now notice that here Charles has split them into two different groups, right? And he's like saying solo 1 and 2, solo 3 and 4, right? And Charles is kind of relying on a sort of a unison approach, right? Unless told otherwise, right? So this is assumed to be unison, and then here he's saying, okay, 1, so first player, and then both, right? It's a different system. A lot of times you'll also see people saying 1 only, right? Or only 1, only 2. There's a lot of English vernacular used in British brass band scoring. Okay, then Repiano, a B-flat cornet. Okay, and it's really hard to describe exactly what the Repiano does, but I think that a lot of one way of describing it would be that they are like the fixer, right? Like in any attempt to take a string arrangement and realize it for brass, or to take just any idea and realize it for a bunch of cornets, there are always going to be holes that need to be filled, or there are going to often be holes that need to be filled. So that's part of the Repiano, part of their job. Another thing that they possibly might do is fill in for, like they might be like a secondary soloist, right? They might work to manipulate inner voices here. So, like for instance, here you're seeing like the Repiano double the lower solo cornets and then come in here with this middle B flat, right? And then ending together with the B flat of the first and second. So that's, I mean, it's first rate Repiano scoring, I would say, throughout this whole thing. Charles is doing a great job. And in fact, what makes me really excited about this, Charles, is how much your score could possibly inspire people out there to get into brass band scoring. Because there are so many great brass bands out there. There's an enormous amount of enthusiasm for it in certain countries. At least I know here in New Zealand, it is a whole world that a lot of people just don't really realize is there. And they've got their competitions and their concerts and their tours and all this other kind of stuff. And if you get into it, it's seductive and it just pulls you right in. And the people who play it are, I have yet to meet somebody who was mean to me or who scoffed at me or who was, they were very welcoming and very kind and, inspiring. And, they discovered me. They came to me and said, listen, Thomas, can you score, your 37-minute. It's more like 45 with all the bells and whistles and then other arrangements that I've done and so on. So I've been approached several times. All right. Okay, so to get back to this. Okay, so the Repiano, just think of it as like the fixer, right? There's much more to it than that, but a lot of times, like if you want a really massive sound on top, you could almost think of the Repiano as being like a bumper, like as a horn bumper. I've got a tip on horn bumping. You go look up on the Orchestration Online website. So it's just like it's an added voice that can strengthen the top voice, or can actually just take over so that you don't use up your cornets, but you just have to make sure that you aren't using up your Repiano too, right? Okay, now. Second B flat cornets, very very similar role to like the second violins to a degree. Okay, now they are also sort of second in like physical capability or technical capability, right? So and the same thing goes for the third. So like like a lot of this is ranked by how good you are. Right, and how you can move up or down the chain to up to first, back to second, and third, and so on. There is a in the brass band world, there's a little bit more of that kind of competitiveness. It's almost like a school, right? Where people kind of move up and down and they get better and so on, or they drop back. Say as their chops start to wear out and get older and so on, and they want to give young folks a try. Don't want to put in as much practice and so on. Alrighty. So third, third cornets, you could think, well, that's kind of similar to a viola in a way, but there is an instrument that is much more similar to a viola, right, which we'll get to in a minute. All right, and then the E-flat soprano cornet. All right, and you probably noticed, listening to that mock-up, just how bright and how brilliant this little pea shooter is. An E-flat cornet is a lot like a little E-flat trumpet, okay? It has got a very bright tone, and the only problem that I see working with E-flat cornet is that there are often problems in the players pulling back because they're so used to being given the stink eye by the conductor for being too loud all the time. And like I've actually experienced this, giving a big beautiful line that I knew that would just be natural for the E-flat cornet, and then just like hearing them hold back and stuff, and then kind of talking to the conductor afterwards. Hey, it's okay. They could play out a little. That's all right. I've worked all that into the arrangement. So yeah. So that is the cornets. All right. And then the flugelhorn is it's the in marching bands in Germany, they developed a cornet that was big and mellow. It had a kind of a larger build and a larger flaring bell, and it had a beautiful mellow sound, but it had the same exact range as the other cornets. But it was able to take the more mellow sounds of, say, band horns, and take them higher more effortlessly, right? Okay, so it's just another cornet to a certain degree, but then again, its timbre makes it fit in with the horns very, very well, right? So a lot of times you'll see like four-part horn scoring, like because you've got your three horns, which we'll talk about in a second, and it's not uncommon to see the flugelhorn at the top of a four-part harmony with the other horns, okay, but it's not really a horn, right? It is a cornet. And it's called flugel. It's like, it sort of means like the wingman, right? The flugelhorn is the instrument that plays out at the edge of the wing in the marching band. So that originally that's how it got its name. At least that's what I've been told. Okay. Now, here's the thing: is that like all of these instruments are usually like single players, except for some exceptions. All right, so the E flat soprano is always like a single player. You don't need more than that. And then here, we have four players. Re piano is always a single player. The B flat cornets are, the second and the third are usually two apiece, right? And the flugelhorn is always one guy. All right, and the same thing. The horns are always single players. The baritones are always single players, right? So we're looking at six players here, right? Six players on six staves. Same thing goes for the trombones. And then when you get to the euphoniums, these are two players sharing a staff. And the same thing with the basses and the bass trombones, tubas. So the E flat basses and the B flat basses are a pair of they're in both cases they're a pair of tubas that play unison a lot of the time. Okay. All right, so back to looking at the band. I promise I won't take more than another 5 minutes to get through this. So solo horn, first and second. So these are E flat. These are instruments in E flat. All right, so there's a certain logic to this system. Instruments. First, we have instruments in B flat, similar to like C instruments, right? Like a C trumpet or whatever, if you hate transposing, or a B flat trumpet. Okay, and then over that we have like our little E flat cornet, which is similar to the like I said before, E flat trumpet or like an E flat clarinet, right? So it's a higher version of the main instruments, right? Okay, and then below the lower E flat horns, this is pitched an octave below the soprano cornet, right? So in this case, we've got these band horn style instruments, right? It's kind of like a small euphonium in a way, all right? And these players, like especially the solo player, they get lots of very, very cool featured lines. One of the reasons why they're called solo, just like the solo B-flat cornets, they get a lot of featured work. Oftentimes, you'll see something like this, the way that Charles has scored it, with two of these players on the same exact line. So you've got just that extra amount of energy with the second sort of playing right underneath it, and so on. But these horns are very, very similar in range to the concert horn in F. All right, so with a lot of these instruments, it's really like I am looking at the Sibelius version of this score. I hope you forgive me for that, Charles. But you'll notice that like with this, I did it on purpose because it had like the the professional range notes and then the out of range notes and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I've found is a pretty good rule of thumb is that unless you are scoring for somebody who is absolutely total, like a band that is a bunch of really experienced players who like a challenge, it's best to keep things within the, avoiding any notes that are too low or too high. Now, there's nothing wrong with a high B flat or a low B flat or whatever like that. That's totally basic, But some notes at some dynamic levels, some registers, some kinds of things, those are a little bit more difficult. All right. So just think about, the horns, like 3-part harmony, playing a lot of things that are very similar to horns in the concert music repertoire, concert orchestra repertoire, using the flugelhorn as a resource, as a maybe as a top voice from time to time, giving the whatever harmonies that you're doing a little bit more height and a little bit more intensity when it's needed. Okay, now I mentioned before that there were instruments that were like violas, right? And that's here we go. So the baritones have a very similar role in the band to that of viola. They take a lot of the inner voices. They tend to not get pushed too high or too low. They don't tend to be relied on too much for technical brilliance, and that is something you'll probably hear me comment from time to time in your arrangement, Charles, when I feel like you push them a little bit too far in terms of like level 8 players, no problem. But like most players are going to have problems with some of the things that you scored, I feel. So here we go. Then the trombones are basically just trombones, except they're reading in B flat, right? Yeah, the tenors are reading in B flat. And it's the same exact reading that you would get with a bass clarinet, right? It's the same sort of sounding down a major ninth from the written pitches. And the same thing is true of the baritones. They have a similar range to the trombones, but they are much more subtle in tone than the trombones. Now, having said that, I mean, you push a baritone solo very high and very loud, and you get the opening of the Mahler 7, right, which is really creepy. Another reason why the baritone isn't usually brought out as a solo instrument. It has I wouldn't say an uncomfortable tone, but it just has it can be chilling when it's scored a certain way. Okay. And then the bass trombone, this is the only instrument in the entire band that is scored in C major, right? That this is in concert pitch, notes sounding at pitch. All right. So yeah, you just have to get used to this whole way of scoring, and I think I might write a tip in the book, the upcoming book, about how to quickly read and comprehend brass band scoring, treating the key of B flat as your home key, right? And then treating E flat instruments as you were the instruments transposing to F, right? Like, up a fourth, down a fifth, that kind of thing, in terms of the central pitch. And then just realizing that everything is actually one, like your home key is actually one step down, right, from the written pitches. One tone, one whole step down from the written pitches. Or an octave plus a whole step. And so on. Or 2 octaves plus a whole step, right? In the case of the basses. So yeah, trombones. They have the same role that trombones would in an orchestra, right? But they're much more of a workhorse kind of an instrument in a brass band situation. A lot of times you hold off on using the trombones in orchestral music, except for, in really specific situations. But in brass band scoring, they are so useful that they are kind of like everywhere. Now, euphoniums, they're like the cellos of the band, and a lot of times, like you see trombones taking very cello-like roles, but the euphoniums are the instrument that I would say, in terms of the whole sax horn family, the whole band horn family. A lot of people don't like to credit sax, Adolf Sax. So in terms of the whole band horn family, I would say that is the instrument in that particular configuration, that is the most idealized, that is the most perfect, right? And I'm not talking, I'm, leaving out the cornets, right? So a lot of times the euphonium players get like these incredible solos that are just, that are heart-stoppingly beautiful. Euphonium players often are specialist soloists. I mean, the parallels to cello, to being like a cello is absolutely spot on. I feel it's really, the roles that are given to the instrument, the players, the soloist tradition, and all that other stuff. Okay, so then E-flat basses are a very low instrument. Their scoring is yet an octave down from the E-flat horn. So it's similar to like a contralto clarinet, right? So it's down a sixth from written pitches plus an octave, right? So this is down a sixth from written pitches, and then this is down a sixth plus another octave, right? And then the B-flat basses here are like a contrabass clarinet, right? So down 2 octaves plus a whole step. Right? So this middle C right here would be 2 octaves below middle C plus another whole step. So, this is really kind of is what's great about the E-flat basses is that they can take over the role of playing like cello-like basic bass kind of roles, right? Just like the bass function roles, so that the euphoniums don't have to constantly be digging around in the trenches. Like, so for instance, here you see that Charles has given this line right here to the that is doubling in pitch. So we've got this unison right in here. These euphoniums and then the E-flat basses are playing in unison, right? If you remember your transpositions. But and this is the bass. This is like the bass line of this particular section of the music, right? So occasionally you'll have the euphoniums jump in and play part of the bass line. It happens more often than you might think from the way I'm talking. And then very often, just like cellos and double basses, the E-flat basses and B-flat basses will play in octaves together, right? Of course, the scoring is different. It's not an octave apart because these instruments are tuned a perfect fourth apart, right? So the B-flat basses are down a fourth from the E-flat basses, just like the pitch of B-flat is down a fourth from E-flat. So anyways, it's so that is your thumbnail introduction to the British brass band, or to the brass band. And I just like apologies for kind of stretching this out. Hang on, my other screen fell asleep. All right, so now we are ready for the evaluation. Sorry about all that, but you forced me to it, Charles. Okay. All right, so I am going to play completely fair with this, and evaluate it exactly like all the other evaluations for this movement, right? And that is to say, I'm going to look at the first two sections double A and double B. And then from there, we are going to compare the different approaches that were used by Charles to one another. All right, rather than just continuously go on forwards, just so that people like don't get lost and they can, they can compare this form a little bit better, in terms of being a rondo and so on, and marvel at the different very very cool things that Charles did. All right. So kind of starting off, there is like a there's a bit of inconsistency here in the slurring. Like here, you've got two different kinds of slurs. So I think you should just like not do this. Maybe these are left over from one conception, and then So I think it should all be like this: ta ta, right? Or even just get rid of all the slurs and go ta 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 ta, right? But anyway, so one way or another, two different kinds of slurs. Don't do it. Get rid of it. All right. The first concern in terms of our evaluation criteria is: do the shifts of dynamics and registers in the piano score imply contrasts of texture? And everybody is taking that for granted. But look at how Charles is interpreting this. I think it's quite noteworthy, and maybe to some brass band orchestrators or brass band arrangers, they might think, oh, well, that's obvious. But I think it's actually for our audience is going to be mainly composed of people who have no idea, about brass band scoring. I think it's incredibly instructive, right? You've got your cornets on top and your cylindrical brass below. So it's like very, very similar to like, heavy brass, right? It has kind of a heavy brass kind of a sound, especially with this many cornets kind of piled up on top of these functions. So so just it would be very similar to like to trumpets and trombones, right? So just think trumpets and trombones replied to by like French horns and tubas, right? So we're kind of really it's very much going back and forth between the two different sounds, the kind of slightly harsher, brighter sound of the cornets and the trombones especially. And I like the little push. I don't think you need to. I don't think you. I mean, I understand the motivation behind the ta ta ta. That's the way you conceive it. There's nothing invalid about it. It's kind of pushing the hairpin past the accented note implies that you want them to continue to get louder, right? Whereas, functionally speaking, sorry, the screen jumps around here in Sibelius. Functionally speaking, this is probably what you'll end up with, right? There. Sibelius. It's ridiculous. Okay. But, all that aside, it's a nice transcription of the original material, which is, after all, is just only 4 voices, right? Now that is answered by our, like as I said before, here we've got just as I mentioned, right? We've got the B flat flugelhorn and the rest of the E flat horns kind of all playing together with a little baritone at the bottom. I'm doing that ba da da ba bum, and you got the euphoniums and the basses below. If you had not added this lower bass function, I would have doubled up the baritones here. Right? But I think this is interesting. You've got this dun 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 thing happening here in the baritone and the E flat bass. Right? All right, and then same exact treatment, ta ta ta, a little louder. All right, in the pretty much the same instruments as before, but just adding a little bit of E flat bass on the bottom. I think that's wise. All right, and then here, like you change things around a little bit. You've got your the soprano cornet coming in, ta 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 ta, and once again, this needs to be cleaned up. The slurring, I think ta ta is way better than ta, because like you're like with this particular thing, you're allowing the player to articulate on the downbeat, right? Right, and this is just the strongest way in this particular kind of motif-based scoring, right? Or not even motif. It's it is a fragment of a of a musical idea. Ta 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 ta. Yeah, and yeah, just to get back to the scoring of this, flugelhorn plus E flat soprano cornet, and then here, E flat horn and the two baritones working together, plus the euphonium and the basses and so on. I mean, it's fine. There's a part of me that is looking at all of this intense baritone scoring and like thinking, okay, well, this is grade 8, it's fine, because like there can be some really awesome baritone players, and I've known a few, but at the same time, I'm thinking like, are you limiting yourself by putting a lot of really difficult parts on the baritones? Right, a score that could be like grade 6 is now has to be 8 because of the way that you scored your baritones, or will you end up having to give a lot of things, like split a lot of things off to the euphoniums and the second horn and so on? Are you just making more work for yourself down the road, right? Especially like really fast precision playing. That's the thing that worries me the most about this. Okay. Now, I have focused on a few things in the previous evaluations of this movement in other videos, where I talked a little bit about whether or not this part should be meno followed by a tempo, whether there should be a slight pause at the beginning of the BB section, the beginning and the end, like if there's sometimes dramatic pauses just to kind of let the hall clear a little bit of some of the big chords and so on. And I feel that completely has no relevance to the way you scored this. So let's not worry about it, all right? I'm just telling people, if people are wondering why I'm not talking about it, I'm telling you up front, I don't think that it applies here to Charles's approach, right? You basically have gone just steamrolled over any of those concerns, and I think that that's actually a great thing, that I don't have to bother with it. However, I really do like the restraint here, right? Just like B flat flugelhorn with a little bit of solo horn, and I think it's very cool the way you bring in solo horn and first horn at times, just with a one long sustained note, as other things are happening around it. In this case, like it's very similar to that sustained F, right? That's in the original score, but it's fine. And of course, like just to mention really quickly, right? Charles has chosen to score this in the actual concert pitch of G flat, right? But it works out better for these transposing instruments. I think really well. So to get back to the functions here. All right, so that's what we should be focusing on now. And once again, I just kind of feel that some of this tai kind of tai. I just don't know how I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that sure, like a couple of bars of it could be done all right, but like I'm just wondering if it even needs to be like that. Maybe it's just easier to go ta 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 ta, ta rather than ta ta. I don't know. Maybe some brass people out there can back me up on this or can contradict me on this. But I just kind of feel that it would be easier to either go ta 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 or ta 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 ta. Just like to slur it all rather than to go ta ta, because like it's the what concerns me isn't so much the efficacy of it, although there is some of that, like slurring up a sixth and things like that. I just kind of feel like some of the slurring should be a little closer together on just especially when it's going so fast. Or maybe just like maybe better to just have it all played single tonguing. Or I guess double tonguing, but separately tongued. I almost feel that that's just better because like the other thing too is like the whole management of the phrasing of the tie 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 that there gets to be kind of a possible a rhythmic irregularity, right? Especially with some players urge to sort of to flick off the top of the top of the slur, right? If they're slurring up to it and then letting go right away, right? Will it end up with a kind of a slightly galloping rhythm, right? Those are just some things that concern me about that. Applying this directly to brass band scoring at 144. And this is one of the reasons why I was thinking, well, slower, maybe this would be a little bit more effective and so on. Yeah, I mean, there's like lots of cool little things that like you're throwing in a little bit here and a little bit there. In practice, just a teeny little bit of playing here and there. Those are things that happen a lot in brass band scoring, and it's just like the question of whether or not like does the player need a cue? Are they able to inject that little tiny bit of that little fragment of figuration in a way that like doesn't just suddenly call attention to itself, like sort of pressing the button on it, like right? that it's just like something that is part of the fabric, right, of the energy. So, having said that, I think that the question is this smooth rather than awkward? Do you maintain the nervous energy throughout? And the thing about it is that like I feel it's not so much nervous energy so much as it is more like it's that sort of brass bandy kind of I mean it's energetic, but I don't feel it's nervous. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, I think that you've transformed it just by in the way that you've scored it, and and the choice of instruments, right, to being kind of more of a a driving piece of music has a lot of which has a lot of popular sensibility, right? I don't want to say pop, that's the wrong thing, but I've heard other brass band pieces that have like a lot of beautiful precision, tucka 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 kind of playing, which you've scored in here. So yeah, textural and dynamic expansion, absolutely beautiful. I love the way that that you've got these middle parts wandering their way downwards, filling in. This lovely trombone and euphonium thing with the B flat basses on the bottom. That's one of the things that I just feel is is missing here is the sound of two B flat basses playing in unison is quite different from one, right? And it is one of those qualities of brass band, like the unison tubas, right? Unison E flat and B flat tubas, when they play, they just have this wonderful sound, wonderful rich sound. That you wouldn't get from say like if you listen to the planets, for instance, where you've got like a euphonium kind of, or tenor tuba, which is playing a very similar function as the E flat basses, and of course like the bass tuba, which is kind of doing the B flat bass kind of a thing, right? So okay, so I think that the textural and dynamic expansion is terrific, right? And then I think that it's really wonderful the way that you change the context, right? So it's a so going into the bar 12 thing, it's, you know, there you get 4 bars, and then the bass repeats itself. So so the way that you have got it, the way that you've got it scored, I feel that, you know, like with the E flat horn here and the flugelhorn and so on, and you know, the bass, the euphonium and trombone working together here, I feel that that is a beautiful answer to what happened previously. And I think that you could put some slur marks over your first trombone part to make it kind of match. No, like a lot of people have real problems with slurring trombones at all, but like if you put slur marks here, I think that you can do the same kind of matching that you do before. You know, like the baritone here and the you know, the first baritone and then the second baritone and so on. I think that you can get that same beautiful energy, the beautiful legato kind of sound here in both instruments, right? So if you just tell the player that you want them to play in a legato kind of a thing, they can fake it, right? Even if they are cleverly re-articulating every single note, you know. So yeah, yeah, and then this is really really well done. The just like the everything bursting towards the downbeat at BB, right, a double B. So I have a little note here: ending phrase with finality, framing the next part, and that is absolutely perfectly done. The perfect use of the solo cornets here, right? This is just much more in tune with what they would be doing. I'm not so sure if you would need if you need to trade off like this though, right? I would almost think that it might be better to go first plus second plus third plus fourth, right? So that you just ended up with like finally 4 cornets playing all at once. And you know, the idea of the 4 cornets, I mean, it's just like a section of first violins, right? Especially when you consider how much you've got going on here in the other cornets. Every once in a while, you have your repiano cornet like filling in a space, like you're doing this kind of scoring, and I just have to point out that the second and third cornets are going to be twice as powerful as the repiano, right? You could almost do something here where like your fourth was doubling the repiano, and then the third was just joining in to the other solo cornets, right? For instance, that would balance this out perfectly. It's just those little teeny things in brass band scoring, just like people are constantly doing a little compensating here, a little bit of doubling there, and so on and so forth, just to make sure that the texture is absolutely beautifully balanced all the way through. Yeah, and this is cool. Boom, boom, right? Yeah, and you know, just as I mentioned before, I think that this will be the last time I mentioned. There's no need for a little pausa or a little, you know, place to catch the breath, just because of the way that it's scored, and especially like, you know, one of the things I think it would be a shame if you had to slow down. So, you know, if any of my cautions that I am giving you here would help you to make it easy to stay at 144, right? That would be ideal. And that would remove, I think, the need for any kind of a breath or any other kind of a thing. Right. All right, so here, this kind of die, 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 kind of on the offbeat in your euphoniums, that is exactly the instrument to give it to. I'm not so sure that the baritones are the players to score in this way, right? So grade 8 baritones, absolutely, but like if you're working with say like grade 5, grade 6, I would want my baritones to be playing everything on the beat, right? So just I would say first baritone come in on the upbeat and play these two notes, da da, and the next one going da da, and then da da da. Yeah, I think it's just better da 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 da. Rather than da 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 da. Like I just feel that it's just a little safer at this breakneck tempo, right? And here and there you've got this little da da, or you got da 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 da. And I think that's all very safe. Da 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 da. When it's your B flat flugelhorn, okay. And you don't do it for too long, right? Now, pushing your solo horn all the way up there to this high C sharp, I'm not so sure if I would ever score my solo horn higher than around C, but I mean, there are a lot of brilliant solo horn players. I mean, I just feel there are so many other instruments that could do this better, right? I mean, you've already got your, you know, we got the involvement here of your third cornet, and I mean, I'm just wondering whether, like, and then this here, right? I mean, this is certainly playable, but like pianissimo, you're going to get a very kind of a slightly rough or weak, ragged sound, right? Like considering that you've already got like the trombones involved here, like here's where I would be more likely to want to involve euphoniums or even baritone players, right? Yeah. And then once again, you got your flugelhorn playing on the offbeat. So like flugelhorn players, uh, you know, they have a rep in the brass band of being able to do amazing things and to play incredible solos and so on. They're like this scoring shouldn't be a problem even at 144. Like all that there's little offbeat things, but I wouldn't push it too much, right? Just be careful how far you do it. The baritones I don't trust at all, right? And unless they really are grade 7, grade 8 players, right? And I really apologize to baritone players, but you guys know, right, that there are, like it's not just the fact that a lot of times less capable players get stuck on baritone, but it's also the fact that it is a beast to play, right? That's the main thing, and that doesn't help, right? It's the same thing with violas, right? Viola jokes, like people are constantly teasing violists and so on and so forth. But the truth is, like, it is really hard to play viola. I mean, like to play really high notes, to try to finger them on the A string, getting up there into like 5th, 6th, 7th position, right? And you've got to lean your hand right over the shoulder, and and try playing all that stuff, lightning fast, right? So just really. I tend to be a little conservative with my baritone scoring, and not any insult to the baritone players, but to try to make things more absolutely ideal for them, right? That more ideal circumstances. Okay, so I'm not sure why you have the number 1 over. So do you have? I wonder if these are copy paste errors. Right? You should only have one trombone. I mean, I guess maybe some brass bands have 2 sets of trombones, maybe 2 first, 2 seconds, and a bass. Yeah, I think these are copy paste errors. Yeah, there should only be a single player on each of these staves in usual, like that's what I'm used to. Down here in New Zealand. Yeah, but I like this kind of nervous energy. I think that works really, really well. Yeah, and then the little second horn part right in here. Yeah, it's just really, really excellent scoring. Right. So nice. Okay, so now we are going to flick back and forth between the sections and compare how did Charles score different recurring parts, right? Okay. So remember there was like a straight sort of quasi trumpets plus trombones, right? Sort of almost like heavy brass against conical brass going on, except that the cornets are also conical. But you see what I'm saying, right? It's like, it's that the brighter sound against the cooler sound, right? Or the more tempered sound. And then there was a little bit of development here with the E flat on top and so on. All right. So, yeah, and then this is all really lovely. So, how did it happen the second time? Um, I feel it's very, very cool having the repiano and the flugelhorn working together. I say, so here's an example of really good repiano scoring, right? So it is a way of bringing in, like, of making the flugelhorn part brighter, right? Or maybe making the repiano sound a little more measured, a little more honeyed, right? It's very, very nice. And I like the whole forte piano. And maybe, like, if you want a nice punchy accent here, don't have the hairpin go past the beat, right? Because otherwise you might be giving the player the idea that you want them to go da da da. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? But I think what you want is da 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 da, right? Okay, and yeah, notice like 1, 2, right, and then both, right, rather than unison, right, or a duet. Okay. So I mean, it's essentially identical in the piano score, right? Uh, so here, like having these two fellows team up here, and then the horns in baritones, kind of taking over the center of the center of the sound picture. That's really, really lovely, and of course, like euphoniums on the bottom with a little touch of boom here on the E flat bass. Very, very cool. And then answering, right? You're using bright colors, right? Soprano cornet, low soprano cornet has this really wonderful sound, and then repiano cornet. Uh, you know, these players should be able to play down to G, F sharp, and so on. It's not the most beautiful sound. Just as long as you are aware, this is not like getting below B flat on a cornet is just not very ideal. You know what I mean? I mean, it's playable. It's just kind of a lot of people might consider that to be kind of a junky sound, but it's fine. It'll work fine. I might want to actually double it a little bit just to get a little. It's a little bit like horns. Like you push horns really low, and it's good to have two horns playing on the same pitch. Right, and then trombone. Bum 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 bum. Yeah. Yeah, in octaves with the E flat. Right, and then you've got this little, da 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 bump. Yeah, yeah, it's nice. Right, and then you just have like the same instruments answering with a little bit of help from the E flat basses here. Ba da da, ba 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 dum bum bum. Yeah, and then single cornets here. Yeah, and and flugelhorn doubling up on the second cornet. Almost, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, and a little bit of second horn. Yeah. Right, and then for the little intimate moment, flugelhorn, da da da, bum bum ba dum bum, and with doubling with soprano cornet, it's so beautiful, such a great idea. And then like this solo horn, just holding that note, so nice, and the euphonium on the bottom. You have great ideas here, Charles. Really, really lovely. And then that leads wonderfully on to the next idea, which we will come back to. If you've been following these other movement 2 evaluations, you'll know that I'm going to jump ahead now to double E, right, rather than continuing on, right? All right, so we have just looked at both of those treatments, both very, individual, right? Sorry, I'm just thinking of Columbo when he wants to give somebody a non compliment. He says, "You're a very individual type of person." Who isn't? Right. Okay. All right. But yeah, both of those parts are individual from each. They're different from each other. They're and you are exercising your imagination. Okay. So now at double E, Beethoven's scoring gets very big, right? He's got big octave. He's got octaves in his right hand. He's got his left hand jumped up an octave. Slurring to chords, to triads. Right. So yeah. So how is Charles going to handle this? And I feel it's just very, very cool here. We got the solo cornets, which they should be able to pop out a high C with no problem at all, right? And then we've got our trombones also pushed rather high. I mean, not enormously high. This written C here is a sounding B flat above middle C, right? So a seventh above middle C, right? So I mean that's certainly playable. A good a good trombone player should be able to go up to like E flat, right? And then what's really nice is the way that you have scored all this so that it goes, you've got this and then da 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 da. I feel this works really beautifully. Another reason why we just really don't need any kind of dramatic pause here. And it's so simple too, right? You have there are more pitches you could put in here, but it's perfectly it's perfectly workable the way that you've got it. Just to sort of point a couple things out here that are really important for people who are watching me evaluate this and getting real excited about the possibilities of brass band scoring. Be aware that a lot of piano transcription, right, and a lot of orchestral transcription to brass band instruments, you are going to be running into a lot of high pitches that just don't work for brass band. And what I want you to understand is this mantra that I have tried to get people to really work into their consciousness, and that is that a lot of times, in the trumpet, and in this case the cornet's top octave and a fifth, or octave and a fourth, it will sound an octave higher, right? Because its body of tone is so powerful. The actual root tone is weaker if you look at a spectrograph, but the body of tone, the second partial, the third and fourth partial, those are very powerful. So it gives the illusion to the listener that the pitches are actually quite high. So you don't have to constantly go running to your soprano cornet and give them really high pitches throughout the entire piece and just completely wear them out, right? Charles has got the right idea here in his use of soprano cornet, although there are one or two pitches that I feel are a little too high in a couple of places, which we'll get to. Charles has got the right idea of not overusing the soprano cornet. The soprano cornet is very powerful. It's very beautiful. It's got a wonderful high end. But if you're constantly using it to fill in certain high pitches that occur orchestrally or in the piano score, then you're not helping the music. The music will just end up sounding very shouty and very brittle and shrill all the way through. So, the compromise that Charles made here versus the piano score, I think, is a very wise one. Okay, so enough of that. All right, so what's the answering, right, is muted cornets right? Right. This is the mute is left over. So you're going to have to put a little note in there that both third cornets are muted. So I just drop it in here. Maybe two consort unus, right? So just two separate markings, right? And then here you keep it really 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 simple, right? And almost like a direct transcription of what's going on in the piano score, like bum 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 bum, with a little bit of euphonium on the bottom, right? Still muted. Okay, very very cool. And then kind of same scoring as before, but with trombones in the bottom, ba da da, like all three trombones, and then same fellows answering dun da 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 bum bum, right, and now mutes off. Now soprano cornet coming in, a nice long solo, pianissimo, high, A flat. It'll be a perception of pianissimo. It won't be the actual pianissimo that the other instruments are capable of. If you want a real clear, beautiful, balanced pianissimo, you give this to the flugelhorn, and it won't be too different in timbre. Da da dum, answering by first solo cornet. Da 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 dum, bum, ba, da, da, and notice how the both comes in here. All right. Yeah, and then we will evaluate this when we get to it. All right. So now let's look at the fourth and final iteration of the of the main theme. Okay, and that is at bar 150. Okay. All right. So last time we're going to state this, and once again, you got a really, really nice lead into it from the the previous and so on. All right, and now you've got the full complement of cornets, right? And you decide to do like just a higher, lower kind of an approach here. Da da da. Okay, all right, so I feel just as you've got some doubling here, I feel that you need to have both baritones here, okay? Or maybe baritone and second horn in unison on this top line. I mean, it's great to have a baritone solo or whatever, but I feel that in this instance, I would just really want my this to be secure, right? And second players here, I don't really see anything you're doing with your firsts that is all that demanding that requires this not to be the first rather than the seconds. I would, just to be absolutely as secure as possible, I would make these guys, if you just want that lone, that lone bass sound, I would give this to the firsts. Right, and then bum bum bum, do a little bit more of our mid-range instruments added, first horn, flugelhorn, and so on. Yeah. Da da da. Soprano cornet and solo cornet and octaves. That's very very cool with the flugelhorn and euphonium. Right. Da da dum bum 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 bum, and you just keep it really really simple right in here, because you're going to that dun 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 bum dun 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 into the development, and we'll talk about that in 20 minutes or so. All right, so now let's jump back. We are going to completely play fair here and evaluate each of the sections. All right, so just kind of looking at the the way that you dealt with this, just reviewing it once again. We had the baritones sort of wandering their way down, the really lovely textural expansion here. and the repeated notes, a little bit of high soprano cornet on top, right? And then you came back to it and developed it in a different way, but with the same kind of an approach, the tucka 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 kind of thing, and a little bit of soprano cornet again at the end, and then this setting that up. All right, now let's jump ahead to bar 43. Right. Right. So here we notice that it's very, very similar. Like, we got the baritone, so first, second baritone wending its way down. We got this like this right in here. I'm not convinced by this, the efficacy of this. Maybe maybe like a band horn player, band E flat horn player can comment on how possible this is at 144. I feel it's almost would rather just see this, as I said before, slurred by the beam group, tie, or maybe, tucka 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 might work better. The sixth is what bothers me. The sixth and the fifths, I think closer together, they make more sense. And the same thing here. I'm not convinced by this. I think it's the kind of thing that is possible but very unwieldy. That's my instinct here. I would shy away from it, just as a matter of course. Yeah, like how clean would this be on bassoon, right? 2 octaves lower, or an octave lower. Right, and so kind of the same thing as before. Right, and then coming from the middle and so on. Right, and then we'll talk about this. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so all good. So let's jump ahead to bar 100. Okay. Yeah, it's. I should have made sure in this version that there were bar numbers, but I can navigate my way around. Yeah, and we see a sort of a similar thing here. Baritones wandering their way down, bass trombone. I feel that it's different enough to where it's there are similarities. Once again, I'm a little troubled by some of the slurring here. I feel that like if you got this tucka 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 thing going on with all these instruments, why not just spread it to all the sixteenths, right? Maybe like a few of the notes could be slurred, and other ones could be like articulated as staccatos. And this is just really, I'm really not sure about this. Flugelhorn players, either back me up or contradict me. 144. How would you guys approach this? Do you feel that this is playable, or is it barely playable in a way that would make it sound uncomfortable? Right. I just wonder if there's a way of reinterpreting this. Maybe alternating with, say, ripiano cornet. Like maybe like the flugelhorn could be going dia 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 dia, right, and then the ripiano could be going da 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 da. Do you see what I'm saying? Like maybe that works a little bit better. Yeah, but otherwise, no notes on that. I think it works really, really well. Right, and then here we got this. All right, so we'll get to that later. All right, so now let us jump back to the BB section. All right, and then this is that. Yeah, once again, I like this little punctuation that we've got here in solo cornets and soprano cornet and so on. And yeah, and I've already stated, my concern. I don't know if it's how valid it is. There's probably a lot of baritone players out there saying, "What do you think you think we can't play anything?" And that's not it at all. Once again, it's just to make it as efficacious as possible with an instrument that I know can be a bear to play with certain kinds of approaches. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, and then we had this. I feel this is all really good scoring. I'm a little worried about this. I would rather see this on solo horn, right? Just for just for it being more effortless and so on. All right. So now, um, so let's actually. I'm going to organize this slightly differently than I have before. Let's jump ahead to. No, we'll just do the same thing as we did before. Let's go to 51. Right, so here are those. Okay, so Repiano cornet player. A lot of times those guys are as good as It's almost like third horn to first horn, like being really, really, really good players, like who are just very handy at fixing a lot of things, right? So like it's very similar to like third horn in a horn section. So you would think that like this whole thing restata, 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 restata. It's not the most precise thing. I would I would prefer having like bun ta dun ta dun ta dun ta dun ta rather than rest da 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 da. It's just the thing of like not having the not being integrated into the rhythm as well. Right? But you've already got your baritones here, right? Like this is something that I think I'm not so sure about this high part here, but yeah, but I think it's all playable. Right, so this is where I would back up the baritones. Maybe those fourths. Yeah, they're probably fine. So yeah, so you keep everything really stripped down here. I think that if you're going to be punching the offbeats here in your solo cornet, then you can integrate the Ripiana cornet better, right? So I think that if you had them going, ta 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 ta, right? If you have them playing the on beat, right, and you have your first solo cornet punching the off beat, I think you're fine. I don't think you need to leave your Ripiana cornet just constantly playing, the offbeat all the time here. All right. All right. So now let's jump ahead to 74. All right, now here I really love this whole idea of like your horns, like here you're giving them a chance to take a breath, right? So they're going, taka 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 taka, and then pianissimo sempre, right? This is so cool. I did something similar in my arrangement of having a background harmony in one of these flights of fancy. Okay, so this is good. I almost feel like you're not giving your euphoniums enough to do, and this is where like if the band director felt that you should bring the euphoniums in more, this is the kind of part I would give to them, right? Because I feel it would work better even than on trombone. And second baritone and so on. But I mean, I'd almost rather give this to the first, just in terms of just trying to be precise and everything else. But it's still fine. Yeah, and this is very cool. Yeah, you're trying to keep things playable, and I think that is pretty good. Yeah, so I just like once again, I think that this works way better on euphonium if we're going to go all the way up this high. All the way up to a sounding D, a ninth above middle C. Yeah, I mean, since you've already got instruments that are on those, you know, that are on those pitches anyway, right? we've got our solo cornets, then what good is the first trombone doing there, right? Might be better just to have like, yeah, I mean, just once again, it feels more like a euphonium thing to me. All right, and this is very cool. Da 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 da, and third cornet. Yeah, and yeah, that should work fine on flugelhorn. It's a ways to go, something this constant, but it is pianissimo, so I think that helps. There's this one really really long stretch for the flugelhorn. I think we'll run into in a minute. Yeah, but yeah, and then just like I mean, this is a long stretch for you to be. I wonder if the trombones could dovetail right around here. Yeah, and then euphonium coming in at the end with a bit of, yeah, right. So I feel that this is just really gorgeous. Just maybe a little tweaking here. It is a long time, but of course this is at 144 in bars of 2/4, so it's not so bad. Okay, so now let's jump ahead to bar 110. Okay, just right. Right, and then here we've got that, and this is all, really playing it safe. I like the, going back and forth between flugelhorn and baritone and so on and so forth. Once again, good baritone players, right? Then great. Otherwise, this is more really of a euphonium part. Like, I mean, I would personally give it to euphonium, but it's all good. The main thing that like, and here's another thing. I'm on your side, baritone players. Another thing I'm worried about is that like a lot of people out, looking at this will look at the really active baritone thing, and that's great, for really good players. But will get emboldened, that like most people just starting off with this will work with baritone players who are like maybe like grade 3 or something, or grade 4, right? So just being realistic about what you are going to deal with, right? Like you maximizing the players who are known for their technical brilliance, right? I think is never a bad thing. But I love the going back and forth between flugelhorn and bandhorn kind of thing. I think that's very very cool. Okay, and now jumping ahead to bar 133. Okay. So this is, I feel, the coolest part of the entire arrangement. I'm biased. I can't help it. So this is so cool. So you're starting off with your trombones, right? Then you're coming in here, like slowly insinuating a different timbral color with, E flat bass, euphonium, and baritone, all second players. That's kind of cool, right? And then here you're having like this harmon mute thing happen. And then as these players move forwards, then you are insinuating to a horn kind of a timbre, right? It's just so cool. And then you just kind of hold on and hold on and hold on and hold on. It's so fun. All right, and then, all right, so, but the actual mechanics of it, right? So this is one of those places where Beethoven puts in a pausa, right? Like he scores it into it, boom, and so on, yeah. So a little bit of baritone, not too much, that's fine. Solo horn, and keeping it on the downbeat, that's good. And then, having your solo cornets coming in, a bit of soprano. Yeah, and then this is really lovely. You're pushing forward, and then piano subito, right at the timbral change. is very, very cool. Flugelhorn and soprano cornet intertwining a little bit of baritone in there. Yes, this is the flugelhorn part that is really long. Yeah, it's like, see here you got this really long flugelhorn part. Yeah, just that's all mostly pretty loud without much of a break. Yeah, I think most flugelhorn players can handle that, but good ones. But yeah, all right. Yeah. Now see this, I like this baritone part right in here, and then going to the flugelhorn, and this is where I'm just a little unsure. The rest, I might want to have the first baritone player going ta 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 ta. All right, maybe give them this pitch, like an octave lower or something like that. All right, just to keep them absolutely rock solid. Yeah, and a little bit of trombone and so on. And yeah, so once again, I'd rather have this played by trombone and this played by euphonium. Yeah, very cool. All right, so now we are going to jump back to bar 57, and we're going to look at those big explosive, boom. Hang on. Right, here we go. So the first one is past double D. No snickering. All right. Yeah, boom. All right, so here my concerns in the criteria are, consistency of strength rising through instrumental registers. How do you handle the worrying doubts, right? Maintaining textural and rhythmic integrity, and worrying doubts again, right? And then then past that is the same thing that you deal with in the second half of double A, right? So, but we'll get to that in a second. All right. So I feel that this is all pretty strongly scored, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, so, I think that this is a bar that people will just have to really count and make sure that they come in on, on the half beat, right? But I think it'll work out fine if people are really paying attention. I like the way you drop the other solo cornets here, right? And then notice how the repiano is going die 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 die. So this is I feel that this works really really well, right? And then the same thing here with the solo horn. You're keeping it in the stronger instruments, tie 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 tie, and along with the ta 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 ta. So yeah, so that all works really great. And then yeah, with a little bit of baritone and euphonium. Yeah, this could also be like second horn, right? Just maybe a slightly stronger, more dependable instrument if you're working with a lower grade band. And then you just kind of do the same thing again. So that'll work great, right? And then here we're getting to that, yeah, and yeah, I think you rely on baritones quite a bit here. Do you know what I mean? Pretty agile. This is like I might want to score this in you got your trombone sitting around not doing anything. I think you could just get more force and more clarity. And this is not a technical thing now. This is more of a timbral thing. I mean, yeah, I'd almost rather have the baritones pushing here and the trombones taking this very nimble stuff. And in euphoniums too are barely being used. And it's nice to give their, nice to give these players' chops a little bit of a rest here, especially going into this really long tie here. Yeah, that's nice. And then a little bit of a rest before picking it up again with this. I think that works really, really well with the soprano cornet on top like that. Yeah, I mean, like some of this baritone stuff, it might also work here if you had both baritones in unison. Like there are a lot of opportunities I think you're missing, like when you're having more adventuresome scoring for your baritones, where you have like just a single baritone playing, where like I think two baritones, just really solidifying and helping each other, and then giving makes maybe some of the subsidiary parts to other instruments would work better, right? Like like this could be played by the flugelhorn, right? And and then the rest could just all be doubled, like as for instance. Okay. All right. So now let's jump ahead to 116. All right. So it's similar, not identical. I think that's pretty cool. I really like the euphonium and solo horn in here. See, I think that those are ideal instruments for that. Yeah, and just a teeny bit of soprano cornet at the end. It's like that, and very cool. And then here you are bringing in another octave with your solo cornets, right? And then having all this taka 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 stuff in the background. I think that works good. And then this is really great. The trombones pushing with the second baritone. I would like once again, like I'm wondering, could this bop, 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 have been played in like maybe like flugelhorn, and then have both baritones pushing forward to this fortissimo on top of the trombones. Yeah, and then so here you got this really long stretch of flugelhorn. And I mean, really, really good flugelhorn player should be able to handle it. But I just, wonder there's, if like maybe, what if you did this, bop, 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 and then had the ripiano cornet come in here and just do this, rest, or da 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 da, right? And then just to not have your flugelhorn player just just continue on and on and on and on and on. Just trying to spell people a little bit, yeah. So that isn't just too much of a big blow. I like these broken octaves here in the basses. That's really, really great. And the little solo horn function in here with the second cornets here. Yeah, it's just really, really great. Yeah, and then this is so great, the way that this pushes forwards here. And notice, everybody who's watching this and really paying attention to all the functions, how much energy there is in the soprano cornet here, right? And, solo horn, first baritone, I mean, in octaves with the euphonium, it's not such a big deal. Here's a situation where you've got these two instruments doubling, so it's not so critical. I would want to end on on the same pitch at the end, right? Yeah, it's same thing here. No need to leave out the downbeat. I mean, maybe you're trying to emphasize and give a little bit of space for this pianissimo here, but I don't think it's necessary. Okay, all right. So now let's look at the coda. I know this is very, very chopped around, but oops, let's go up one. Da 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 da. You've got a lot of mutes, and I really am not really addressing them that much. But there's one little change which we'll talk about in a minute, where I think you might have left out a marking, right? And yeah, like you're really confident in the ability of the baritone in here, and I mean that's lovely, but I almost feel like here like we're seeing some doubling in the second horn and so on. I almost feel like who's the most secure, confident, chummy player in here? That's really like your first horn is not really getting enough to do, I think, here, right? But I mean it is cool, like assuming really good baritone players, then fine. But yeah, still. I mean, it is nicely scored. Okay, all right. So, I mean, all right. So, I wonder at in what does the score say? Sforzando, right? Here you're saying mezzo forte tenuto, right? Do you see what I mean? It's not da, it's da. I just wonder if it's punchy enough, right? Like it feels like, I mean, I understand, but it's like a slur into the downbeat the way that it is, rather than setting up the downbeat with a thump on the offbeat, right? That's the piano part, right? Or here you're going. Yeah, and here we got these accents. Boom, 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 boom. That is a very cool effect right here. Just taking away the downbeat on the low basses. Yeah, and then you just lovely held note here in the first horn. There's a bunch of stuff where you give the first horn something to do, and you put the sustained note on the solo horn. And I mean, I think you can swap that, like you do here. Da 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 ba ba da da ba ba. And this is so beautiful. Just these really simple chords here. Notice, remember I was talking about how like adding the flugelhorn on top, and it's like having a four-part harmony and horns for the orchestra, and then just this baritone, euphonium, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's good that this is doubled here. Right, and then here, all right. So I feel that this is problematic. Like I think that this whole thing could be dropped an octave here. Do you know what I mean? If you really want to get to the top there, like here I don't even know if this is possible, that high F, and I certainly question whether or not it's possible at triple P, right? And what does Beethoven say in the piano score? He says pianissimo crescendo, right? Right, so like by the time we get to the end, it could be, fortissimo, who knows what, right? So, I mean, I love the idea of this being a really beautiful, subtle chord, but I just feel like we're pushing everybody up into the up into the stratosphere here, where the timbral and dynamic control, and even the ability of the lips to get to pull that off is a little questionable. And and then imagine everybody having to rattle this off after having really squeezed their lips down to some minuscule little amount, and then having to go, you know what I mean, at fortissimo. This is the kind of thing that I think, like my horn player friends or my some other brass player friends would just be very, very nervous about. So that's like that is. So I'm just thinking, like, you solve all those problems just by taking everything down an octave and reassigning some of these instruments, right? And then you got no problem. And then you can just completely keep this, and you get way more dynamic control. But like, if you absolutely have to have this, high written F, which is, I think, top C on an E flat, right? On your soprano cornet, saying that your soprano cornet player can play a high C pianissimo, right? Which, it is possible. It's just not the greatest thing, especially after a big blow, right, of a movement like this. So I would say this pitch should somehow get, I don't know why this guy has, the your principal cornet player is getting this high F, where it's much more possible, much more feasible for your soprano player, right? So I just think if you must keep this level of pitch, like, a lot of it needs to be rewritten just to really take some of the pressure off of the high notes, or just drop it an octave. I mean, what's wrong with having everything being an octave lower, right? There's nothing wrong with it at all. I think it would sound absolutely beautiful. So here you're having harmon mute, no stem. You just kind of want this really wispy, dreamy sound, and that's all great. Okay, but do you really want this to be played on harmon mute, right? Rather than... It's another thing too, is just like, if everybody else, if the whole cornet section is taking their mutes off, and then you suddenly have a part with a completely different character, maybe maybe you could mark like mute sempre or something, or just maybe mute with parentheses or something, just to give the players just so that, like, people know that you haven't made a mistake here. And then that just leads to the yeah, and so just like, and here, like, I think euphonium is probably a lot easier. I would rather have the baritone player doing taka 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 stuff like this, right, rather than the tie 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 tie. And why can't, like, if you've got your baritone player going da 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 bum 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 bum, why can't we give this much harder to play part to the euphoniums, where they're like I said, they're like the cello of the brass band. So anyway, mute off. So if we're gonna mark open, this needs to be marked open, and then maybe these guys too, right? Yeah. So I think it's a really cool arrangement. So I've been sitting here chopping it to bits, and I hope you won't take any of that amiss, Charles. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't. But because like, I'm very excited about this, and it would have been great to see you take on the first movement as well. Maybe that's a little less. I can see the second movement being more brass band like. Frankly speaking, that having that wonderful energy and brightness, brilliance. There's a certain flair that comes with some of the best brass band scoring, and I think that you reached for it here. And it's just a lovely idea. And what's the most lovely thing about it is it's keeping me on my toes. Just trying to bring back everything I know about brass band, and I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff. I probably am just I might be the most wrong person in the universe to evaluate this in a way that would be on the same level that I would be evaluating orchestral scores. So don't stop with what I've said here, or take anything that I said here in this evaluation to be final at all, right? Like, if you're doing more brass band scoring, I think that's great, Charles, because you are so gifted. You have such a fantastic ear, and you have a wonderful way of looking at things. There are a lot of really great things that I saw in this, and I'm so sorry I didn't focus on the positive things as much as I focused on parts that I thought that you might need to fix. But I think you know what's working really great and what the most inspired ideas were. But yeah, just such a fantastic thing, and this one of those things that kept my spirits up. I've been looking forward to doing this evaluation for years now. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my goodness. Charles has brought his A game, and that means I will have to as well. So I hope that with that lame excuse, I hope that I gave you enough guidance on this for it to be useful, and I think you should try to get a play, Charles. Absolutely. I don't know how useful it is to any band or whether, how feasible it is and everything else. One thing I will say is kind of fun that, that this was, me asking you to submit it in landscape format. Just a note about that. A lot of brass band directors like to actually have things in landscape format. That is one of the that is sometimes a standard way of doing things. Although I'm seeing it both ways. I'm seeing portrait and landscape being used almost equally in some of the scores that I've seen. But like for instance, I recently had to edit somebody else's. Somebody did a brass band version of one of my orchestral pieces, and then I had to edit it down for a smaller brass group. So I got sent back the score from this original arranger, and they had put everything in landscape, and so I put everything back into portrait. So, but anyways, you won't have to change things too much, is what I'm trying to say here. So great work, Charles, and I don't know, like I keep saying, correct me on this or back me up on this or whatever, and hopefully there are a lot of people down in the comments correcting me or backing me up or whatever, or just adding their own insights to this, and giving you maybe more experienced guidance than I can. You know what I mean? My world is the world of concert music, and it is the world of orchestral music, and that is my jam. That's what I have tried to become an expert on, and I have done brass band scoring here in New Zealand because that is a big, strong part of the music field, and I love my fellow players, and they love my music and have asked me to score some of it, to rearrange some of it for brass band. And I've also done other brass band arrangements of things that I think are fun. So yeah. It is something that I am becoming more and more capable with, and and with that lame excuse, I will turn it over to everybody. Give Charles your best comments, and Charles, thank you so much for for your support over the years, especially these last 2 years. It's really meant a lot, and for your very kind comments, and also for your great questions that you've sent me on some of my tips of just that have helped me to clarify some of the things which obviously if I had not made it clear to somebody with your ear and your capabilities and your experience as a player, then I was not doing my job. So I appreciate that a lot. Anyway, thanks everybody. What a great score to look at. And tomorrow the fun doesn't end, because we are going to be looking at not one but 2 scores. So join me then. I'll see you then, and I'm really looking forward to it.